Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons, and we are going to talk about Brandon Lee Mulligan, and we're going to talk about an absolutely brilliant Dungeon Master tip that came from Ryan Doyle over on Verdigris Table. So it was the first video I'd ever watched from Verdigris Table. It's a gentleman by the name of Ryan Doyle, and he gave this brilliant DM tip, which he got from watching Worlds Beyond Numbers. So let's talk about actual plays for a minute. So Brendan Lee Mulligan is famous primarily, in my humble opinion, from his work on College Humor, which College Humor fell apart. I don't think I've watched one of their videos in 5 years. I think they're still around, but like for a minute on the internet, they were the shizzles is like they were a thing, right? And Brandon Lee Mulligan was on there, and he was very funny. His funniest skit is hardware pop-up store. It's like a CEO of a local hardware, and he plays this old man whose grandson is telling him how to monetize his local hardware, and it is absolutely hysterical. You should absolutely watch it. He also played all the CEOs. They did these, like the CEO of Oreo, the CEO of Skype, and they're really funny. So he's a brilliant, funny guy, but he's also a dungeon master, right? And let's talk about actual plays, because boy, oh boy, there's Critical Role. Everybody in the world knows Critical Role, right? Even a few people outside of the Dungeons and Dragons sphere know Critical Role, but virtually, the Muggle world, even the Muggle world is pretty they're like, oh, critical what now, right? So, but there's this idea that actual plays matter, and I'm really curious where this comes from, because boy, can I struggle to listen to this stuff, right? So Brendan Lee Mulligan and Aubrey Iron, I don't want to massacre her last name, and two other people that everyone in the world assures me are the character sheet over on comicbook.com, the most prejudiced anti-D&D news coverage you will ever see. However, the reason why I watch it, in my humble opinion, the reason why I watch it is their production values are extremely good. They're like me. They have high frequency. They can post 2 times a day. A lot. First of all, I can post 19 times a day. That's not a joke. I've done it. So frequency is a big deal, and so they frequently post, right? And so their production values are very high. They post very frequently, and but they're so anti D&D. Their bias is so ridiculously anti D&D. It's just terrible. But they're Brandon Lee Mulligan is a thing, and Worlds Beyond Numbers is a thing, and these people are actual play nobility. Everybody knows them. They're famous, and I'm like, are they? I'm in the space, man, and I barely know who these people are. In fact, Brandon Lee Mulligan's the only one of them I know their name, right? And the reality is, but I realized there was a Kickstarter, and there's a Patreon, and they just started their own thing. And so I went over there, and I actually turned it on, and I got 10 minutes through it, right? And I had to turn it off, because one, I think the thing I really despise about actual plays is they don't take it serious, right? They're just and these are supposed to be the best in the world at actual play, right? Next to Critical Role, right? And they're just cracking jokes, and they don't take. And Adventure Zone is the same thing. I have never seen a single actual play that takes the game, that takes Dungeons & Dragons seriously. It's always just I get why some people do beer and pretzel games, because they're just not wise and they don't understand what Dungeons & Dragons is. But you would think that anybody who's dedicating enough time to do an actual play would have some clue what they're doing and actually get, put some seriousness behind it. And the Brendan Lee Mulligan, they start, and this is the beginning of the game, right? This is this is the beginning of their whole thing, this big launch. They didn't even get 10 minutes in before they're laughing and making jokes, and I'm I can't listen to this crap, right? And so, honestly, Worlds Beyond Number, man, I do not know. I don't understand how anybody listens to an actual play. They're so, like, if you play Dungeons and Dragons, it's painful to watch or listen to any of these in my humble opinion, because it's just like, you're like, you know, I could do better than this. That's every actual play I ever watch. I'm like, I could definitely do better than this. I just feel it in my bones that every new sentence, I'm like, why am I listening to you know, a campaign and a session that's worse than what I've already produced? It is so frustrating. And if you get these things, can you please explain to me how anyone turns on a 4-hour actual play and listens to these things? I don't understand where people get the patience for this. It is beyond me. I don't think I'll ever, it's just, I don't know. It's like if LeBron James went to watch, a high school game, right? And he didn't know any of the players. I'm like, why would he do this? Right? It's so frustrating. All right, let's get into it, right? One, it was a tangent. I apologize. Let's get it. Actually, no, that was spot on, because we're talking about actual plays, so it was relevant. Let me get to the main point of this video. Thank you for your 6 minutes of patience. All right, so here we go. Here we go. Roll with Polarity. Okay, that was what Ryan Doyle actually talked about in this video, which was what Brandon Lee Mulligan did. And here's the point, right? So I'm telling you, so I just told you, right? And actually, I think Brandon Lee Mulligan is a brilliant dungeon master, right? And I think every single one of these players is a brilliant player, and actually very well maybe a better mechanical player than me, or a better mechanical dungeon master than me. The reason why I can't listen to their stuff is they value every joke more than they value anything in the narrative, and they're more than willing to interrupt the narrative with jokes constantly. And so they don't take their campaign and their session serious. I have no idea why I should. And me giving you 4 hours of my time is taking something seriously. And so if they can't take their campaign and session seriously, I can't. And that's my issue, is I have never seen a campaign and session where even one player was like, hey, we're trying to tell a story here. Can you knock off with the jokes, And here, Brendan Lee Mulligan is literally the worst of them, right? So, but with all that said, Brendan Lee Mulligan is a genius dungeon master, okay? So let's talk about why and what he did, and what Ryan Doyle put in front of me, and what I am signal boosting. I'm signal boosting what Ryan Doyle did in calling this out, and I am signal boosting Brandon Lee Mulligan's brilliant idea. Let's get to it. All right, so Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, advantage, disadvantage, was a huge game changer, right? It had never happened in any other game before, where, for your ability checks, you rolled 2d20 if you had advantage, and you rolled 2d20, and you took the highest, and 2d20, and you took the lowest if you had disadvantage, and it was able to just, like, smooth over all these lumpy, like, you could be like, well, it's dark, and it's, you're trying to shoot this arrow, and you're in the middle of a mudslide, and it's nighttime, right? So you have a disadvantage, right? Or you could be like, same situation, but you look over to the left and you see the ghost of your father. You have advantage because, like, because that gives you a reason to excel. It's brilliant. It's really brilliant. So what Brandon Lee Mulligan did was, at the beginning of the game, there was this really critical, dramatic moment in the game where one of the player characters was about to have the Shire moment, where they were going to leave their village, and they had never left their village before. And once they did this, they would really be an adventurer. They would be stepping out. They would be having that Bilbo moment of, I am going out of the Shire, right? And I have never been this far before, right? And it's a big moment, or might have been a Frodo moment. I often get those two mixed up on what happened to each one of them. All right, so let's say it's a Frodo moment, right? So he's having this Frodo moment, and Brendan Lee Mulligan says, roll 2d20, but you're not rolling with advantage or disadvantage. You're going to take the value that is farthest away from 10. Okay? Now I am naming this roll with Polarity. Okay, I was very tempted to call roll with drama, right? But there might be times where you could use this where it's not a dramatic moment, and you're calling for a roll with polarity, right? All right, so roll with polarity, okay? And so you roll with polarity, and you roll 2d20, and you take the d20 that has the most, that is farthest from 10, right? So if you get a 17 and you get an 8, you get to take the 17, right? If you had gotten a 2 and you got an 11, you would take the 2. Now what this does is it means there's going to be a harsh, dramatic failure, or there is going to be a very significant, triumphant success, right? And it also increases your odds of a critical failure, a 1, okay, and a critical success, right, which is a 20, right? This is brilliant. This is a really big deal. And a lot of people like roll their eyes at 5e and go, "Oh, you're not the best rule set." And I think there's a better rule set. And I don't think people have any idea how transformative advantage and disadvantage work, right? And then people are going to come in the comments and go, "Scott, we're in the game before, before D&D 5e, blah, 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 whatever," right? Here's the thing. I totally agree. Right? Advantage and disadvantage might have been another game, but nobody knows what that game is, and it's not famous. And the reason why is nobody gave two rats about that game, right? And the reason why is it wasn't on Dungeons and Dragons, right? Like, and like just to be clear, like Paramount Plus made a brilliant movie about Waco. It was called, I think it was called David, right? And nobody watched it. And then they put it on Netflix 2 years later, and it was a smash hit, and millions of people watched it. Same thing here, right? Like, just because you had the idea, if nobody saw it and nobody cared, you don't win, right? Like, D&D wins, right? Like, that's the thing, right? You know, like, yeah. And D&D made it matter. That's the point, okay? So here's where we land. This is absolutely brilliant. So let's talk about this. Let's get this all the way there. So, one, Brennan Lee Mulligan is a freaking genius dungeon master, okay? In fact, if he could elevate his narrative above his jokes, he might be better than Mercer, right? But he's not going to be able to do that. He's literally like a trained comedian, right? So I don't think, like, unless he listens to this video, and odds of that are 1 in 1,000. So, and even if he did, you know, I don't think it's not possible, Brennan. I don't think it's possible for any actual play to take the campaign in the session seriously. I've never seen it done, not even once, right? And it's what turns me off. I just cannot get past that, right? All right, like, if you don't take your stuff seriously, why on earth do you think I should? It's just, I cannot get past it. Thank you for your patience. I'm sorry. It's just, I just can't understand why, you know, how anybody gets through these actual plays, right? All right, so all that's there. So when should we use this? So first of all, he used it in a great position, right? And so one, I think to explain this to your players and say, I'm going to say roll with polarity, right? Now, is that an imposition? What's interesting is Monty Cook actually has a fantastic game, called Cypher. I really like Cypher. It's a very good game. And what he does in Cypher is when a dungeon master, air quotes, whatever nonsense word he uses for it, anyway, when a dungeon master imposes, like, this is a dungeon master imposing on you, like, you have the right to roll 1d20, right? And now the dungeon master is saying, hey, I'm not giving you advantage or disadvantage, but I'm putting 2d20 in your hand. That's an imposition. So first of all, I think every time this happens, you should get inspiration, or you should get some small benefit, right? Because it's the dungeon master imposing on you, right? The other thing that I think that I would say is, so one, I highly recommend you put roll for polarity in your game. Every time you, as a dungeon master, impose it on a player, you are going to give them inspiration or some small benefit, right? And then I think that's only fair, okay? And then because it's a new change, right? And it's an imposition on the player characters until they see how brilliant it is, and then you might be able to remove that, right? But the other thing I think is really interesting is once per session, each player should be able to say, I'm going to roll with polarity, right? So, and actually, depending on how you want to handle this, that's another thing you could do, is you could impose this on the player characters and say, you could get rid of the having to give away a benefit. You could do one of or other. You could give the benefit. Actually, sorry, let me get this super clear. You know what? I'm going to remove that, right? Don't give an inspiration. Just say roll with polarity. But when you introduce this for the first time, introduce it at the beginning of the game and say, in this game, I'm going to do a thing called roll for polarity. And I'm not going to explain it now. I'm just going to do it, and I'll explain it when it happens, right? And then the moment you say roll for polarity and you show it to them, and you say, each one of you now can choose to roll with polarity once per session, right? And that's it, right? And you could say, and then actually at that point, if they like it and they start to use it, and you get a sense that they want it more than you've given it to them, I would let them do it as many times as they want. I think it's a really cool idea. I think this is absolutely brilliant. I think Brennan Lee Mulligan is a dungeon master genius. This is one of the best ideas I've ever seen. Best original ideas. Best embracing of page 4. And by the way, one last thing. Whenever you hear the word homebrew, all you're hearing is, I don't know what Dungeons & Dragons is. There is no homebrew in Dungeons & Dragons. There is page 4 of the Dungeon Master Guide. Dungeon Master Guide, 5th edition, page 4 says, the rules aren't in charge, you're in charge. So you can change the rules whenever you wish. And the moment you do, it's not a homebrew. That's Dungeons & Dragons. When you play Dungeons & Dragons and you change it, you are playing Dungeons & Dragons. If you play Dungeons & Dragons raw and you never change anything, I would tell you as a Dungeon Master, you actually have never played Dungeons & Dragons, right? The page 4 Dungeon Master Guide option, the rules aren't in charge, you are, is very critically important, right? So this is not a homebrew. This is how Brennan Lee Mulligan plays Dungeons & Dragons, and this is how you should play Dungeons & Dragons, in my humble opinion. Roll for polarity is brilliant, and I've told you exactly how you should implement it in your game. I went long on this video. Thank you for your patience. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.